Hi guys, thank you for joining me today. In today's tutorial, I wanted to show you guys the 4 Royal Icing consistencies that I use when decorating my Royal Icing decorated sugar cookies. So to start, we use a really good, thick Royal Icing base recipe. Now, of course, I will include in the description of this video a link to my tutorial and recipe on my Royal Icing base, which I highly recommend using. A nice, good, low and slow, strong, thick, start off with a good, thick base recipe. Now from there, we're gonna remove a little bit of this, a scoop of this, and put it inside a separate bowl. Now the size bowl does matter. I recommend using something, whether it's a bowl or a cup, that fits in your hand. That way you have the best control. Now this is our super stiff, this is my stiff Royal Icing. All I have done is colored this. So we have taken it straight from the mixer, put a little bit in this bowl, and I've added some food color. And now I have my stiff consistency. Now this is the consistency I use to actually create a lot of my flowers, most of my Royal Icing transfer flowers. Now, to tell whether or not this is going to be thin enough to pipe, but yet stiff enough not to lose detail in your petals, I'll show you what I look for. So you may or may not have to add a little spritz. You always want to start off coloring your Royal Icing first. Let's just say that first. Always start with color because some gel color will thin it a little bit. You want to start off coloring it. Then from there, we can either add a little bit of water at a time. I use a spray bottle. Or you can sprinkle in a little powdered sugar if you need to make it thicker. But always start with coloring first. So this was just color and from the base icing. And I think it's already perfect, but we're gonna test it. So it looks like toothpaste, so it's glossy all over. None of it looks dry and crusty or cracked. It all looks smooth and glossy. Now you're gonna lift your spatula straight off. Now I'm gonna put this down and I'm gonna look at that icing right here. I'm no longer looking at the bowl. I'm now looking at the very tip of this icing on the back of that spatula. Now that is where I'm gonna always look to see what my icing is gonna do when I put it on my cookie. So if you see here, it's not doing anything. It still looked really good and creamy. I got a nice tall peak when I pulled it away, but yet it didn't break or crack and it's not moving. So this is exactly what you want stiff consistency to look like. Now, I'm gonna be able to make really beautiful petal details that aren't gonna break and they're gonna stay just where I put them. Beautiful. So that is our stiff. Now we want to make sure when we go to bag this stiff, it's a little harder to push through a bag. So you're going to put it into a bag, and then my recommendation is when you go to use your tips, put your tips in a separate bag because then you can slip your color down into here and change your color whenever you want. And it creates a double bag over that stiffer consistency. So it helps with bag breakage. So I highly recommend doing the separate bag and tip method so that you can change out your colors whenever you want. Much easier. I love this tip. So now we're going to move on to our detail and our outline consistency. Now, in order to get that, you're going to, of course, use your spray bottle and give it a few spritzes and then check it. Now, what I'm looking for, remember, I'm not looking, I couldn't get the hang of counting. I just couldn't do it. So instead, what I like to do is pull up on my spatula, flip it over. Now I want to see what my icing is doing. So here we have a really wet icing. The little tip fell over onto itself, but what is it doing now that it has touched itself? Now my outline or my detail consistency I'm looking for is doing exactly what it's doing here. It's keeping that line, that tail, but it's not melting back into itself. Now, if I really wanted to try to get that to work back into the icing and disappear, if I shake it, I can get it to melt if I wanted to. But yet when you pull up and you flip over and that tail touches itself, what I'm looking for in detail consistency is for that tail to not melt unless I shake the heck out of it. So for this consistency, I use this on those people who like to have a flood and outline consistency. This would be considered my outline. I use this for all of my writing. I use this for transfers. I like to use this for dots. It makes really good writing without having to worry about craters, but it takes a lot of scribing. It makes great letters, but you can see what happens if you don't scribe it or shake the heck out of it. It won't settle completely on its own without manipulation. But sometimes that's the perfect consistency that you want. So our next consistency, this is going to be my flood. Now this consistency I use predominantly to cover your cookie. It's called flood or fill. Now, to get this consistency, this is probably the closest to what people say glob and ribbon are, but I don't use glob and ribbon. What I do is I instead I give it a good stir, and when it's ready, I am looking for, does it plop off the spoon and stop? Or does it continue to waterfall down? Now you see that curtain of icing right there. Now, does it continue to spill down as gravity's pulling on it? Or does it just plop and stop? So, if it plops and stops, you're going to need a couple more sprays of water until you get literally right to that moment where it continues to waterfall. And that is exactly what you want your flood and fill. Now, if you bring it just to this point right here where it plops, but then it continues to pull itself down, you won't necessarily get as many craters and as many of those little holes in your writing and fill when you're doing your puffy letters. Now, when I'm doing puffy letters, I will use my detail and outline over here, and then I'll fill in those puffy letters with this flood or fill. Lovely stuff. You can also use this consistency if it is right at this point to make dots, to make certain little, like I think I used this consistency for this dot for the happy face. Now, my only other consistency that I have here that I use is going to be dip. Now, I use dip a lot. I do a lot of paint your own cookies, and I use dip on all of my paint your owns. It's just easier. Now, this is probably the only consistency I use a counting method for, because it's, no joke, it's just 1, 2, 3. So here's what I do. I drop it into here and I thin it so that when I'm done dropping icing, that the entire surface is going to level out on a count of 3, between a 3 and a 5. I like it a little closer to a 3. Now, if it's thin enough to level out on a 3 to 5 count, it's going to allow it to be thin enough for all your little bubbles, all those bubbles to come to the surface when you're dipping. I also have a video on dipping, so certainly I will include the link for my dipping video as well. But what happens when I drop this in and I just mess up that surface? 1, 2, 3. Does it level out within a 3 count? And that, to me, is a perfect dip. You can see here, I use dip as well. And you can see it levels itself out. Now, let's talk about storage. How do you know when your icing has gone bad? Now, I store my icing in these bags, in a Tupperware container, and I do not put it in the refrigerator. I do not put it in the freezer, but I do cookies every week. Now, whenever you let royal icing sit for a few hours or more, it will always start to separate. The more water content inside your royal icing, so the thinner consistencies, are going to separate faster because of the water content. Separation does not, I repeat, does not mean it's going bad. It's just the water and the coloring mixing or separating from the mix. Now you can see here how much darker it is at the bottom of my bag than it is my top. Now, I recommend that you actually take this and put it into a bowl and remix it, then rebag it. Anything that isn't a stiff or an outline detail consistency is probably going to need to be rebagged. All of your flood, dip usually stays in a bowl, but usually your floods are going to need to just prepare yourself. You're gonna have to remix them. Now, some people, when they get really good, they close off the end here and they will massage it while it's still in the bag. I, unfortunately, have not been so lucky to always get away with this, and I end up with uneven swirls in my icing. Well, it's because I didn't mix it like I was supposed to. So save yourself the headache and mix it like you're supposed to. Now, how do you know when this has gone bad? Royal icing keeps forever except for when it's wet. Now, when it's dried like this, it doesn't go bad. I'm telling you right now, these little guys, these little royal icing transfers can be kept forever as long as they're in a dry, cool, out of light, direct sunlight place. They keep for years. They're wonderful. But this stuff that is still wet does have a shelf life. So how do you know when it's gone bad? Very easily. It will tell you when it's gone bad. So when your bag is sitting and you have that separation down at the bottom, like here's my red. It's kind of liquidy and dark down at the bottom. If you touch it and it feels like wet, hard clay, it has gone bad. It means that those sugar crystals can no longer reform, that they're now so confused that they're turning into a different chaotic sludge down at the bottom. Now, you feel your icing and it feels creamy and dreamy. If you start feeling something like wet clay, that starts feeling like clay, do not mix that back into your bag. Just scrap it and start over. But it usually takes sitting out at my house. My house is usually kept at about, let's say, less than 72 degrees, between 70 and 74 degrees. I keep these at least 2 weeks before it starts separating and I get worried about that clay down at the bottom. So it takes a while for the crystals to get that confused, but that's what you're going to look for. Of course, you can certainly pop these guys if you say, well, I only make cookies once a month. So take this entire container, pop it in the freezer, and then just let it sit out overnight or on the counter for a few hours until you're ready to use it again. Very easy. Just know that you have to always check your icing bags for separation. And just resign yourself to the fact that you are going to have to remix a lot just to make sure that you have the best consistencies possible. All right, guys, I hope this cleared up some of this for you. I do want to mention over mixing. That is certainly a subject that everyone asks about. Now, I recommend never using a spoon to mix your icing. Now, why? What I prefer are spatulas that are more flat-edged and more knife-shaped or like a metal spatula shaped. Because as you're stirring, the term over mixing does not come from how many times you're mixing around your icing. It comes from how much air you're actually incorporating into your icing when you're mixing. Now, a spoon is literally going to scoop in as you're stirring around more air into your icing. And I think that is the main culprit that leads to too much air in your icing and that sponge-like structure starting to form on the inside. So, toss the spoon, mix your icing with a spatula. Save yourself the aggravation. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it cleared up some things for you. Certainly like, subscribe to the videos, share them, leave your comments and your questions. I love interacting with you guys. Take care and thank you so much. Good luck and happy baking.